Hi everyone, here we go with our first video on our watercolor techniques. So I'm going to be talking to you about these different things that we're going to be doing. As I mentioned, there's lots of different watercolor techniques. A lot of them are very traditional, and these are the ones we tend to go back to, and we're kind of doing mostly on this first place. But basically, anything you can do in a combination of watercolor techniques that's on a piece of paper is fine. So just a matter of what should go first and how that should happen and so on. And so that's why there's kind of an expanded list, and I can give you some further instructions. I'll give you some tips later on about things. I also wanted to mention, you won't need it today, but next time you will need a salt shaker with you when you do your project. I forgot to include that last time. And then I have these instructions written out. Couple things before we get started. Watercolors are considered transparent, which means you can always see through them. So you should never paint them so thick that you can't see through them. It's the white paper from behind it kind of acting like a light and making it really show up bright that makes watercolors do what they do. So you have to always make sure you're painting like a light or a medium. It's never supposed to be used as heavy paint. Other paints do that better. So it has a fine pigment to them. It's ground up super fine compared to some other paints which may not be ground up so fine. Some of our things we have to do in more than one step, so that's why I have some sticky notes here reminding me what to do. The first thing is one of our main techniques, and that's called even tone wash. Now, a wash is when you have the paper wet first. And when the paper's wet first, then the paint spreads out easily. Like I said, well, I didn't say it yet. Like if you ever painted a sky and you've been painting it, and then you get these brush strokes, but you don't want brush strokes, you just wanted it nice and smooth. Well, the paper has to be wet, and then as you paint the sky across, you just keep painting it, keeping it wet, then you get this nice smooth area of color. So that's called an even tone wash. The word wash means the paper's wet first. So like I told you yesterday, to get started, add a little bit of water to each one of your colors so they're nice and soft. So I'm doing that right now. And because this first one is a wash, I'm going to go ahead and paint that whole square in. I'm going to use a brush that's slightly smaller. Yeah, I think I'll use that one. So make sure you only paint in the square. If you get the whole piece of paper wet, you're going to have some problems. So what I'm looking for here with my wash, you can see the actual paper is very slightly, I mean the brush must have a little bit of paint in it. It's not quite white, it's very slightly pink. Anyways, you get that one section wet, and you know how wet, you want it shiny wet, but you don't want too many puddles. And then just continuing to use a larger wash brush, either the biggest one you have or a slightly smaller one. Take any one color that you prefer. I'm going to go with red violet. It doesn't matter what color. And then you can just add some color. You let the paint just naturally on its own spread out. And what we're doing is we're trying to get an even area of color, for instance, like you might want for a sky, and nice and even and smooth. What's nice about watercolors too is they tend to spread out a little bit, kind of smooth out a little bit as they're drying. So even if I paint this on and it's not quite all the way smooth, I'm getting the pigment all the way to this, it'll smooth out a little bit when it's drying. So right now I'm kind of trying to get rid of a couple of these darker areas. So this is going to dry out pretty flat. Also, I can paint right off the side of my paper over here if I want to. So this is going to be a pretty flat area. So if I was painting a sky, something nice and smooth, I get the paper wet first. Now, a couple of our things we're going to be painting, I want a color underneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this even tone wash again. Down here where it says brush line, let's practice it and do it again. So what I'm going to try not to drip water on something else. If you drip water on that, it's going to make a a splash, it'll make a white mark where the water dripped. So for brush line down here, just nice to have a color underneath. So I put some kind of light color, like maybe yellow, orange, light green, something that's not too dark. I don't know why I'm in the mood to put yellow, so that's what I'm going to use. This time using my slightly larger brush. And I'm just going to put I just want to color there before we paint on it next time. So the yellow, and I'm liking this even tone wash. It's a little bit easier to work with a slightly larger brush. So I'll recommend this brush for that technique from now on. So we just wanted color here. We're going to get back to the brush line later, but we wanted a flat, even area of color. Okay, using this larger brush, and the same thing for this one that's called dry brush. We're going to be painting this in 2 steps as well. So you want to get a color down there. I would say for this one, you probably want a brown or a green. I think I'm going to paint, I think I'm going to put in kind of a green-brown. I'm going to mix a color. So I'm getting it wet first because I want to wash underneath what we're going to do next time. No, you know what? No, I'm going to paint a brown. Kind of a brown with a little bit of green here. So I'm just mixing a color together. I don't want my color to get too dark, so I'm getting some off on the paper towel. And I'm kind of blending it right here on the piece of paper. If I have too much color, I can take a paper towel, soak it up a little bit right here where it's puddling on the edge. And I'm going to keep mixing it together until I kind of get the color I wanted. So I wanted a greenish, brownish color, and getting rid of some extra water here on the edge just by soaking it up with my brush or brushing it right off the top. So another even tone wash or even area of color. So you're going to get used to doing that. And as it, like I said, as it dries, it's going to dry even flatter. A little bit more successful using the larger brush. See how much flatter this is than the first one I did. So good to know. Okay, the next one we're going to do is I want to get something started, and it's going to be in 2 steps as well. One of the things that watercolor paints do is you have these colors, you can mix together colors. There's quite a few colors here, obviously. However, sometimes you want to layer things. For instance, you want to show combinations, like leaves on a tree, each leaf looking a little bit different color or something like that. So we're going to do something called overlapping transparencies and just show you how pretty it looks to have colors on top of colors. So I want it to be able to dry in between. So that's why we're going to do half of it right now, and then we're going to do some more of it later. So we're going to make this one. We're going to start off on dry paper, so don't get this wet. This is on dry paper. It is not a wash. It's on dry paper. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some colors down. I'm going to let it dry, and then next time we paint, I'm going to show you how nice it's going to look. So because I want it to look a little bit like leaves or something, you could choose other topics. I'm going with leaves. I'm going to use some yellows. I want it watery. I don't want too much. I'm going to paint just some brush strokes in yellow. Get that going. I'm going to paint some brush strokes in this kind of yellow-green color I have. Just individual brush strokes. If they touch each other like I just did, that's fine. That doesn't matter. And then I'm going to paint some in my next green. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just let this dry. And then what we're going to do next time, which we're going to come over this after this is completely dry with some more colors. And I can show you how it like multiplies the details when you do layers of colors on top of each other. And there's some pretty cool stuff you can do just by overlapping. You get even more colors. So this is step 1 on the overlapping transparencies, there's going to be another step. Another thing I wanted to get started today, it says the word tape. And like, what in the world, Mrs. Rouse? I'm going to move this one out of the way. So stop the camera if you needed to see this longer. It's going to dry for a little while. And that is tape. There's 5. If you look here on the information, there's some what's called resist. And resist is something that keeps the paint from getting to your paper. And some of them are, one of them's wax. The only part of that you can't get it off again. Frisket. I'm gonna, actually I can show you a couple of these things. Actually I have a huge block of wax. I just, cut off chunks of it. But it's kind of like if you ever decorated Easter eggs and you could draw with wax, and it just, wherever you've drawn, it leaves the paper white. The only problem is you can't change it. You can't get it off again. It's permanent, so you're stuck with it. The other thing you can do is use Frisket. This is just for using with watercolors. Pretty expensive. This little jar is about $7. So if you're in the classroom, we'd share it, but it's too much money to send home. It'd be silly. But anyway, you can paint this on. You paint, when it dries, you paint over the top, and then you can actually peel it off. It's like rubber cement, and keep painting. So it like made a plastic shield on your paper. So this can save parts of your painting. For instance, the little glimmer in your eye or something like that from getting paint on it. Another thing that's pretty successful is just using tape. So I want you to take some of the artist tape that's wrapped around this yellow pencil. I gave it to you first semester. And what you're going to do is make some kind of design with this. The paper has to be dry. If the paper's not dry, you're going to really create some problems with this. So I'm putting this on the dry paper, and I'm pushing down, but I'm not pushing it down so hard that it's going to rip later. So I'm just pushing down the edges pretty hard, not necessarily the whole thing. You can make any type of design. I just made a design where it's kind of following each other, and maybe I'll try a couple more pieces up here and here. What I'm going to be showing you is that we can paint next to it, and then this is going to keep the paper wet. See, I got a little bit of color right there, so I'm going to have to avoid that. Here we go. Okay, so what I've done is I've put some pieces of tape here, just any old kind of design I want, and that's going to keep the paper white underneath those pieces of tape. Now what I'm going to do, and mine's non-objective, it's not going to look like anything in particular. Now I'm going to add some color here and there, and then what we're going to do is just let it dry. It does puddle up next to the tape a little bit. You don't want tons and tons of color, but I think I'll add, I'll just kind of go with some red and let it kind of bleed out a little bit. And then I'm going to use some of the, I told you we have a mixing red that's good for blending colors together. So I'm just going to paint the red. I'm not going to paint it everywhere because I want it to have a, I don't want you to necessarily be able to tell every single place I have some red of some piece of tape. So I'm just kind of painting it here and there. And then we'll see how this all works. Okay, so I just painted kind of around my tape. We're going to let it dry. Then in my next video, I'm going to peel the tape off carefully, and then we'll do some more painting with some tape. And it's going to look really cool. So you have to do it in steps. So that's why we started in the steps. So tape is one of the things you can do. It's called a resist to keep your watercolor paper from getting paint there. Probably its most useful place is if you need a horizon line, like you want to put tape across your painting and then put the sky in and have your sky not go down into your ocean or vice versa. Put the tape there. Just be careful, the paper has to be dry or it can rip. You don't peel this off when the paper's still wet, it's going to rip. So make sure your paper dries between every use of the tape. Okay, that's it for this first video. We're just kind of getting started. We've got some more things coming up.